Sorry, fiddling with the bit, trying to get this into the right place in the presentation. Nearly there. Right. So.
Yeah, you gotta press the button. Are you gonna share something?
Yeah, hang on, sorry. Sharing onto the wrong screen. So just have to switch
So
for the moment.
don't give up.
Monitor 3, monitor 4, monitor 5.
I'm gonna have to push the button, man. 2 minutes past.
Do you wanna and let me just sorry.
Try to share. So they don't think that is not gonna happen.
Yeah. There you go. Can you
yeah,
does that look
fine.
okay?
Yeah, it's the
great.
thank you page. Yeah, awesome.
All right. Sorry about that. Ready when you are.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome. New faces, familiar faces. What a pleasure. Hello, Anu. Hello, Fred. Hello, Claire. Hello, Roger, Paul, and Stuart.
Hi, Claire. Hi, Roger.
Welcome.
Definitely know you.
Okay. We're
Some
gonna
other names I recognize.
We're gonna give those 2 more minutes just for people to maybe leave a meeting or still like, oh my God, still only time I had for grabbing a coffee. And they're gonna be joining and we kick it off.
Oh no, this is terrible. I can hear my dog barking in the other room.
It's okay, we
can't hear him.
No, I'm just gonna get in trouble. He really wants to go for a walk about this time. That's the problem.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, get in trouble with the dog.
The dog and my wife. Both.
You're gonna have to do a walk and talk.
I have done that before, as Roger and Claire both know, I think.
Yes.
Welcome, Debanui or Debanui. I would say Debanui. Welcome. Where are you from? Where is everybody from? Like maybe if you want to share just an invitation, where you were born and where you are based right now. So for instance, I'm from Brazil, but living in Belgium. What about you?
Well, there you go. You've gone a long way. I was born in Kent, in the south of England, and I live in Lancashire in the north of England now. So I haven't gone too far.
A bit closer.
Via North America for a bit.
No need for 3 flights. Yeah, you can type in the chat. If you like, you can speak. We good with that. We open.
That's gonna be recorded though, Artur.
Yes, you gotta be honest. You cannot lie, man.
I'm from California, lived all over the US, and now live in Oregon, which is right above California.
All right. So also in India, Anu and Debanui from India. But now Anu is in North Carolina as well. Debanui, I'm not sure if I pronounce it correctly, Debanui, but yeah, now in Leeds. It's a neighbor, kind of 1 train, and I can meet you in 1 hour and a half or so. From Wales, living in, oh, come on. Don't do that to me. That's hard. Gloucestershire.
Oh,
Gloucestershire.
Pretty good. No, you were better before.
It's like the sauce, but you cannot, I think you skip part of it, right? Gloucestershire. Can you try that, Paul? Can you tell me? Just to make sure that I'm saying correct.
That's pretty close, yeah, Gloucestershire.
Gloucestershire.
You're thinking of Worcester sauce, aren't you? But it's Gloucestershire. Yeah.
That's it. All right. I think that is, yeah, we have some people still joining, but we can kick it off. Thank you so much. If you still want to put there in the chat whether you're from and whether you're based right now, so we get to know each other. For now, thanks a lot for joining. My name is Artur Margonati. I created this meetup with the pure intent of people being able to test new talks and ideas. because I feel sometimes like maybe between the meetup, have a meetup that is like maybe 1,000 people, 2,000 people, 5,000, and people might feel like, not sure if I go there, or conferences already that you can speak. But here's a place that I created that is like really a laboratory where we can really test new ideas. Fred, by the way, was our first one. Benjamin is our second one. So if you feel comfortable, if you would like to say, hey, Arthur, I would like to try a new talk, and we can talk about that later. For now, I really hand it over to Ben, that is gonna take care of this ride to the end of maybe this 45 minutes or so. So Ben, I hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Arthur. Thank you for the opportunity. And this is really going to be used in a lab context. What I'm sharing is not necessarily super new to me, but what I'm focused on really is how to narrow down what is a huge topic. And for me, every topic connects to every other topic, unfortunately, into a very nice half an hour conference talk that I'm due to give at the start of October at StretchCon in Budapest, which I highly recommend if you're in that kind of space. Check it out. It's a fantastic conference in an old Czech movie theatre. Really nice venue and really nicely organized. Not Czech, even Hungarian. Really nice venue, really nicely organized. If I seem a little bit flustered, it's because it's 36 degrees here, and I have to close the door to the air conditioner, and extremely humid. So if I start to sort of drift slightly, it's just the condensation. And I haven't got the aircon when I close the door to allow people in the other room to have a normal life. So there you go. So it's got quite a long title. Title is one of the things that I might tweak a little bit, but I'll try and explain as we go along. And some people in the room who have seen will see some obvious connections and some strong connections to some of the things that I've done and shared before, but that's probably okay. I am on all the social medias as @AntlerBoy. It's not a strange ritual thing. It's a version of the short version of my name before I rebranded myself as Benjamin. Oh, by the way, feel free, as well as keeping cameras on when comfortable and convenient, to keep open mic if you haven't got dogs and things in the background. The more engagement and response I can get from people as we go, for me, the better. So also feel free to jump in at any point. So feel free to connect with me, follow up on the social medias, and all of my other interests are there. I run a consultancy. And do other stuff around public sector services, general organizational change, leadership, organizational development, systems, cybernetics, and complexity. So what I'm going to be talking about today is one lens, a set of 4 dynamics that work in organizational balance that are really useful ways to both diagnose and change the way in which teams and trust and organizational effectiveness are generated or destroyed in organizations. So I'll set off by going through how we tend to fall into those problems and traps in organization, and the flip side, the positive balance, how we can use those dynamics to create a zestful, productive organization. I may talk about how human and organizational needs mesh, and I'll definitely try to get into diagnosis and prescription using this way of thinking, these 4 dynamics and how they relate. What rituals and practices tend to support which of the 4 dynamics, possibly some case studies. It's interesting. I put a LinkedIn post this morning. I tend to do a big LinkedIn post once a week, and most people said they'd want to see the theory behind this thinking, which I thought, oh, that's great. I'll be able to cut that out and save a lot of time in my conference presentation. But surprising number of people wanted the theory, so I might go into the theory. And I want this to be a bit of a conversation. And one of the things I'm looking for you on is what kind of grabbed you. I'll do a little retrospective survey on Slido at the end to try and get some feedback on what you think I should do at this tech conference out of this content, focused on this. Hopefully, I mean, if you think I should just do something else, then by all means tell me. So I might go into some of the deep theory, where this has come from, etc. And I might share some of the models which you might go, oh, this looks a bit of a similar model. Does this relate? David, who's here, for example, has shared one that looks really interesting and definitely has some affinities to this. Yeah. So does that sound okay for what I'm going to go through? That's the basic model I'm aiming for. Okay. So organizations are made up of people. We don't always fit together comfortably. And so the question is, why is that and what can we do about it? And my question really is, have you seen any of these dynamics? Have you seen functional teams, silos, who know who the enemy is? It's the other teams. And organizations that tear themselves apart as turf warfare eventually leads to explosive energy that rips the organization apart. Have you, oh, that's interesting. I've got two dynamics going on there. Have you come across everyone does everything? Organizations where it's like schoolyard football, wherever the ball is, there's 22 players there. Everyone's in everyone else's business, but nobody's really responsible for anything and nobody knows who's supposed to be doing what. I've certainly created that situation more than once. Have you come across every person for themselves, where it's really everybody just doing their thing, trying to make out as best they can, get the best out of grab the things off the sinking ship before it disappears? I've seen all of these, by the way, personally. And have you ever seen total groupthink? You'll soon be absorbed and be happy to be part of this. We're the same and completely undifferentiated, and everybody is kind of functionally a clone or an android version of everybody else. So these are the patterns that we can fall into by over focusing on, over developing one particular of the four organizational dynamics that I will share in a minute. If none of them are developed, we end up with very flat, boring, unproductive, no zest, no life, no energy kind of organizations. So that's another one of the possibilities. So what we actually need is the positive version of the four dynamics that I showed you on a couple of slides ago, right? And here are my four. And the namings of these has been worked on quite a lot over time. I can show you the origins of some of the names if that seems useful, as we get into conversation later. The first dynamic is grouping for specialization, putting people into groups based on their skills, interests, or backgrounds to specialize, to have a finance team over here, a product team over here, to have a capability for marketing, even if they're not permanent teams, to put people into a project team to manage, this particular big client. But the point is, we're trying to do something specialist as an organization. We need to be able to differentiate and not just all be doing the same thing with our clients, with our suppliers, with our competitors, with our environment. So that's grouping. Second one is blending of the groups together, sharing knowledge and understanding, creating a more uniform understanding or approach, bringing people together to learn about each other, to share their experiences, right? And to moderate their behavior in the service of the whole thing. So there's grouping and there's blending. And those are two complementary or antagonistic dynamics. Then there's personal empowerment. That's each individual contributing fully to the group. This is empowering everyone to use their unique skills and perspectives, to bring their whole self to the job, right? Helping people to develop their own unique talents and abilities. And then there is unification, bringing together all the different individuals and all the different parts to work towards a common goal, right? Unifying us as a team or as an organization. This works at any level of grouping, and trying to align everyone's efforts around a shared mission and purpose. And the personal empowerment and the unification, again, are a complementary or antagonistic set. What we're looking for, to cut a long story short, is a zestful balance of these four sets of rituals and practices, these four dynamics. So we're looking for grouping, as well as personal empowerment, as well as blending of groups, as well as unification. And what this talk is all about is looking at why those four are so important and so powerful in organizational life, and how thinking about this set of dynamics, this set of rituals and practices can be used to create a zestful, productive, positive balance. So those are the 4 dynamics and sets of rituals and practices that we're going to be playing with for the rest of the session. I want to take a bit of a supporting argument here that there's a useful model of human needs, which I come back to quite often, right? This says that people need a balance of uncertainty and variety, and certainty and comfort. So we need things to be varied and challenging, but not always, not all the time. That needs to be balanced with certainty and comfort, but not always, not all the time, right? Either extreme is too much, none of both is blur, is nothing. A balance is what we want. We want significance and uniqueness, and we want that to be balanced with a good level of love and connection and belonging, right? And those all allow us to both grow as individual people and make a contribution in the world, right? And I spent ages developing this model, thinking about these dynamics, and then realized that I'd recreated a model that Tony Robbins uses extensively, which is a little bit embarrassing because he's more than a bit cheesy and problematic. But I was pleased to see that Chloe Madain, I don't know how to say her name, but she's American, maybe that's right, actually probably was the developer of this model. But anyway, there you go. So although I actually did work it out myself, it may have been stealing even unintentionally. So organizations actually need to differentiate and be able to do separate things to adapt to the world around them, but also to create stability and make sameness, right? And those seems to chime with the human need for uncertainty and variety and certainty and comfort. And guess what? They can be achieved by grouping and by blending groups. Organizations also need people to individuate, to be autonomous, to bring their expertise to bear. Sounds like personal empowerment, sounds like significance and uniqueness. And they also need us to integrate, to feed and support each other, to moderate our behaviors, which sounds like unification and sounds like love, connection, and belonging. And if you create an organizational context that has those 4 dynamics strongly, that, my contention is, and my experience is, allows you to both learn and grow as a person and to contribute, make a difference in the world. So just to kind of, oh, sorry, I wasn't showing that diagram as I was talking, was I? I was looking at my own slide. So these are all useful learning points for me for the conference. Just to hammer that home, hopefully you can see here how the uncertainty and variety links to grouping for specialization, the love, connection, and belonging links to the belonging of groups, etc. And I'll make that really clear by bringing those in the right place. So what we're looking at here is trying to actively manage 4 dynamics that create effective organizations, and it turns out create effective and empowering homes for humans to do their thing in an organizational context. So if I'm right, and I have got experience of doing this, we can use these dynamics both to diagnose where and how an organization is going wrong, and to prescribe bringing in ways of changing where the organization is going wrong. So I'm going to offer you this model. In terms of the diagnosis, okay, if you've got too much grouping, you get individual silos, even UDI meaning unilateral declaration of independence. You know, bits of the organization just going, sod you, we're going to do our thing. You know, we're going to create our own finance and HR, and we're not going to rely on the center anymore, and so on and so on and so on. Done a lot of work with regional agencies in the UK. It's always the east of England that goes off and becomes independent. I don't know why. You know, there are these kind of recurring patterns. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can see that it can be the case that you have too much of one dynamic going on, and those are quite obvious problems. It can also be the case that you have too little of each dynamic going on, right? If you don't have enough unification, you're going to have a very fragmented culture. You're going to have lack of alignment, lack of a sense of purpose. But I do just want to draw your attention to the right-hand column here, where the point is that we're not trying to simply get grouping and blending to a good level. We want all of these to be quite vibrant, zestful things happening in the organization. We've also got to pay attention to the balance, right? So even if grouping is much stronger than blending, then even good blending, even bringing people together really well, really effectively, won't overcome that separate sense of identity. And vice versa. If blending is much stronger than grouping, even if grouping is strong, but the blending is much, much stronger, you're not going to overcome the pull to, well, I'm not going to make a decision unless all of my partners across the whole organization are happy with it, right? I'm just going to go through the other one as well. If empowerment is much stronger than unification, then even if the unification dynamic is quite good, you're not going to get away from individuals' destructive behaviors just serving themselves, just focusing on themselves being a superstar. There's some really good sporting analogies you could use here. You know, teams that tear themselves apart because they bring in this, this incredible superstar on millions and millions of pounds a year, but who doesn't come into the team dynamic. That becomes too much personal empowerment focus. So although, personal empowerment especially sounds like just a good thing, if it's out of balance with the other dynamics in the organization, it's going to cause real problems. And if unification is stronger than empowerment, even if empowerment is itself quite strong, you're not going to overcome a numbing focus on group harmony, that we all must behave the same. So that takes us into prescription, where the point is, if you've got too little of something going on, you want more. If you've got too much, you want to reduce it, but you also need to balance it with the opposite dynamic. Okay. And there's diagonal relationships going on as well, and an up-down relationship, right? And I'm not going to go into those in too much depth here, but I just want to kind of flag that up, that grouping and personal empowerment link together, because those of you who are kind of well versed in systems thinking might be spotting that there's a little bit of a kind of levels question going on here. In technical systems language, levels of recursion. If all of your energy is placed into your team identity as opposed to the whole organization identity, your personal identity kind of starts to slightly disappear, right? If all of your energy is placed into the blending of the different groups, and I'm in this group and I'm working nicely with this other group, your actual sense of purpose, your unification as a whole organization can be weakened. So that's why, ultimately we want them all to be pretty strong and all in balance, because they all affect each other. So this is probably the sort of sophisticated level, advanced level way of putting it. But I think it's really important to understand they all relate. And the simple thing is we want them all to be good. We want them all to be strong, right? Oh, I didn't realize the words were, okay. Lots of tweaking to be done to the slides. So what does this mean? How can we actually use it? Okay. It's important to note that each different person in the organization will see these four dynamics, experience these four dynamics differently. So there's no real substitute for getting people's perspectives on it. You can look at some of those dynamics that I showed before, what's strong and what's weak, and make your own conclusions. But what somebody sees as blending of groups, somebody else will receive a strong message from that. Well, my group's much better than all the other groups, so I really want to identify with them. So you need to be quite alert to people's actual perspective on their organizational system. So two things we can do. One is weight maps, where we're asking people to identify and write in each of the boxes, what are the things in the organization, the rituals, the practices, the experiences, the symbolism that fit in each of those four boxes, and which of them is the one that they think is the most, how do they rate each of the boxes out of 100 in terms of how much goes on and how much impact it has on them. That's quick, it's rough and ready. And what we don't want to be drawn into is kind of getting into a pattern of saying, this is a blending organization, and that's what we do. We blend our groups, or this is a personal empowerment organization, and that's what we focus on. We don't want to get fixed in one of the boxes. These are not options. All 4 dynamics are going on. They just might be stronger or weaker. So rhythm maps, where you're trying to get people to plot, across the course of a week, I came into the office, I got this symbol that this organization, this team was better than us. That put me straight into my group identity. Then I got this symbol of, that I'm special, and that put me into my personal empowerment identity. And you want them to draw a spaghetti diagram of their kind of experiences, and, how often over the course of a week do they actually experience things that put them into each of these spaces. So that takes more time. It's more likely to pick up on subtleties and symbolism. It's also useful to say that this model can be used to make sure that if you're introducing something that probably has a weighting in increasing the focus in one of the areas, you might want to do it in a way that includes the dynamic that partners with it. So when you bring in a personal development plan, which focuses on that personal empowerment dynamic, you probably want to make sure that it includes alignment with company objectives, but not too strongly. Otherwise, you'll just be focusing on the unification dynamic, and people will go, oh, well, I thought this was bloody personal development. It's not really about me at all, is it? It's just about the organization. So this is where it helps you to look at the nuance of, when we introduce something, what is the symbol we're sending to the organization? Look out for rebounds and squeeze out effects. Too much of one thing can produce people rebelling into the opposite, right? If you do loads and loads and loads and loads of messaging about unification and purpose, and we're all together, we're all achieving this incredible goal, somebody is going to rebel and it's going to say, well, sod this, I can't stand any more of this. I'm going to be all out for myself in this organization. I've just cut off. I've just lost the contact. I just don't believe that anymore, right? So you're going to get people squeezed out into the other dynamics. Another good way of using it is with constellations work, if anybody's done that, where you can actually move around a physical space in a room to demonstrate, which dynamic is strongest for you. We could say, well, when we introduced that personal development plan approach, which of these boxes did that put you into? Did that emphasize which dynamic? It's important in using this, we don't limit it to HR. This is a whole organizational thing. It shouldn't just be, a people issue. Because the way that we work on a day-to-day basis, the work systems of the organization have a massive effect on these dynamics. And it's also important to say that this is an ongoing thing that you need to monitor and balance, and you need to find a way to be attentive to it. It's not one and done. It's not something you can do and fix. So you're probably wondering, I talked about rituals and practices. What do I actually mean in terms of how those, in terms of the 4, I've talked about 4 dynamics, and sometimes I've called them rituals and practices. So the point is that each of these dynamics has a set of typical things that will strengthen that particular dynamic. Okay. So the grouping for specialization dynamic, anytime you create a silo, that's what you're doing. You're strengthening that dynamic. When you have expertise directories, skills development, when people meet together as a team, as a department within their group, you're strengthening that dynamic. And in a slightly subtler way, mentorship and communities of practice will create some of that dynamic. We've become specialists, even though we're spread out across the organization. We now start to identify, and I'm using that word identify and identity a lot, so I think I need to bring it in more explicitly, actually. We now start to think of ourselves as a program manager rather than a member of the HR team, or something like that. Professions and tribes obviously do that a little bit more strongly. If they're done well, they can marry with the blending dynamic. So I'm a program manager and I'm in HR and I'm bridging and I'm linking across the two is possible. Recognition, specialism-based feedback, focusing on the needs of one group. Other people carry out tasks mandated by one specialist group. So as soon as you have, the transformation team asking everybody to fill in a questionnaire talking about how their team is structured and all the rest. You're really focusing on, you're really bringing up that group dynamic, and the imposition of the needs of one group on another. At its heart, grouping for specialisation is about the clarity of allocation of responsibilities, which can be empowering to the people who are given that responsibility, but can be disempowering to the people who lose that responsibility. And unless the partnership relationship is maintained between the specialists who are doing the task on behalf of the organisation and the people who they're doing it on behalf of, both sides get disempowered. So the program management team get made responsible for carrying out all the programs in the organisation, even without the active engagement of everybody else who's needed to actually deliver the programs, if you see what I mean. So the second set of rituals is around the blending of groups. So I'm not going to go through all of these, right? Cross-functional teams is a really good way of trying to create blending groups, but what you're doing there is you're creating another group, another in-group, another identity, another dynamic. And I want to raise at this point that what most people are looking for is permanent solutions to the problem of these four dynamics. If we can just get our scaled agile right, then we'll always have all four of these running effectively and zestfully. If we just introduce matrix management in a really sensible way, then we'll always have the balance of these four dynamics going. And unfortunately, it doesn't work that way, right? It doesn't matter what your approach is. Each of those can veer into any of the four dynamics. So these kind of activities, marketplaces where you bring every group together and they do a show and tell, they hold a stall about what they do so others can understand, and so on. At the how of whole organization strategy, how we actually get together and decide how we're going to carry out our strategy, and anything that shows one group's appreciation of other groups. All of these things contribute to blending. This is harder to do and harder to get your head around. At its heart, it's about building community. So you want the different groups to break bread together. Very symbolic, very kind of important activity to eat together across groups. Personal empowerment, we know what that one is. It's personal 360 feedback. It's good management and delegation. So you know what your job is and what your freedom to act is. It's coaching and mentoring, personal development, feedback, and so on and so on and so on. However, we're usually quite bad at it. We're usually quite bad at actually empowering people and giving people clarity. And we are quite bad at it because we're usually not looking at the balance of these four dynamics and where personal empowerment actually plays a role within it. And finally, the unification dynamic, strategy work on the what and the why. What's the big goal? If we're all working together on what we're trying to achieve, that generates that sense of one team all in it together. Company vision, mission, and values are usually counterproductive in my experience. I haven't got time to go into that in depth, but when you publish something and people realize that it's different from their real experience, then you're creating a cognitive dissonance, which actually drives people away. The concept, of course, is that everybody will be able to hold everybody else to account for meeting their company vision, mission, and values. But the holding to account of a senior person is almost always undermined by hierarchy and by fear and by the fact that the very fact that we aren't living out our vision, mission, and values makes it harder for somebody to say to the boss, you're behaving in a way that's contrary to these 9 statements that are pinned up on the wall. Right? But if they genuinely are owned by us, are felt by us, if we really have the ability to hold ourselves and others to account to them, then they can work. Right? So this is all about symbolism and things that bring us together, right? Things that show we are one organization, and that's what we're really focused on. So this is about, alignment and focus on the same kind of set of outcomes. So let me zoom to my Zoom, my overview. And I want to kind of pause there because as is my want, I think, oh, no, hang on. Let me just jump around. I just want to go back to the big overview model and say, what do you think of it so far? To use the famous phrase, and Are there any questions that I can answer to help you make sense of what I'm talking about these fundamental four dynamics? Thank you for comments in the chat. Really helpful. Well, Paul, I'll read that afterwards. That looks interesting, even if it's from McKinsey.
Yes, I'm usually skeptical of McKinsey articles, but that one's a good one. And especially if you get to the end where it gives you tips on how to recruit and retain people that are prepared. So, you know, what we tend to do in interviews when you're recruiting people is we say, how did you personally save the world? Which is nonsense, absolute nonsense. Whereas it gives you tips such as, what did you contribute to your team's success in the last sprint? Those kinds of questions. So what did you do for your team, rather than encouraging people to stab everyone else in the back and steal credit? Actually, how did you work as part of a team or a community is a much more useful question.
Yeah, really interesting. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Of course, that could easily be adopted by a Borg-like organization, and bring people into too much unity if you were that way inclined.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments or inputs at this stage? David has his hand up. Good etiquette, David.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me? Just checking.
Yes.
Yeah, cool. I've got so many questions, but one of them is you used the terms symbols and rituals. I just wondered whether, you know, I wonder whether if you're working in an organization, whether you introduce that terminology or whether you sort of explain it in a different way. I just wonder whether, like, I feel like talking about you know, I think you were talking about this sort of rhythm survey of someone's experience through the week. So yeah, how might you sort of bring that in?
I guess I tend to, if you're in a techie organization, the language of rituals is around. And you know, sometimes it means rituals, sometimes it means practices, which I think it's very important language to be using. What are we in the practice of doing? When I'm getting people to do things like that rhythm map, I usually use the language of symbolism, and I talk about things like what's celebrated. You know, for some reason all kinds of war memorials are spring to mind, or the stars for the CIA officers on the wall that you always see in the CIA. So there's a clear symbolism there of sacrifice, of not being as important as the organization as the whole that we're giving to, for example. But I often talk about car parking, about office allocation, about who obeys the open plan rules in the office and who doesn't, to get people into the idea of that. And also literal symbols. So there's one organization that we worked with that had a really strong cue about individual performance in their logo. And they were a very individualized, competitive culture to their detriment. And they made some subtle changes to their logo as part of the work that they did to try and generate much more of the balance of the dynamics. So there can be symbolism in that sense as well. And since you have a very strong connection to a particular cadre of people, David, I'll use the example of somebody we both know a bit, who's blogged about a leadership development program. And my way of summing up that leadership development program, which is a big fucking deal, and the thing that you need to go on to get to the next level in that organization, is that she I think very honestly blogged about the experience of being on it, and what the message she was getting was be authentic but not like that. So a real double bind of kind of like, be yourself but stay within the guidelines as well. And that is very symbolic. So that means that to advance to the next level in that organization, you have to be a little bit broken in a certain particular kind of way, where you have to be inauthentically authentic or authentically inauthentic, or something like that. And that's not it's a very well presented, very clear example in my mind, but it's actually not that uncommon in a lot of organizations.
Thanks.
Benjamin, I hesitate to bring this up,
Okay.
Because I'm still wrestling. I think it was great. It was really good, and obviously, you're developing and clarifying kind of a way of conceptualizing all of this and explaining it all beautifully. I think it's brilliant, and
Okay.
but you flashed up for about half a second earlier on the an original version of this sort of thing with whatever, which I recognize. I'm still wrestling here, and this is maybe just a personal thing, or maybe it's a trying to align with your terminology with what we've got here in terms of love and stability on the right hand side and power and adaptation on the left hand side, because I kind of hold the stability, adaptability kind of access. But the way you've conflated it with love and power, I can't get my head around that at all.
So it's interesting that you picked that up, and talking about the theoretical origins of this.
Yeah.
This in management cybernetics, Stafford Beer talked about the need for organizations to balance stability and adaptation. And that's the thing that we all kind of wrestle with. I remember, I think it was a McKinsey or maybe it was an HBR article that I shared to accidental consternation of lots of people, which was titled "Stability Rhymes with Agility," and it was making the point. It wasn't a perfect article, but I thought it was quite interesting actually, that in order to be agile, you need to hold some things really, really stable, and there's that balance and tension going on. The love and power comes from Barry Oshry's power and systems work. And he developed a version of these. So both two of my kind of management heroes, Barry Oshry and Stafford Beer, both developed models which I have mashed together. You're quite right in saying. So Barry Oshry was working with who's the guy who did the scenario planning stuff? Not Ari de Goes, but the other guy who did the reconciliation work in South Africa, and he's a big kind of guru in. It doesn't matter.
Is it Whack or someone?
Not. I'm sending. It doesn't matter. I'll come back to it. His name will come back to me. And he was reading Martin Buber, and thinking of the Martin Luther King quotes, that love without power is toothless or something like that, and power without love is destructive. So his point in those, let me, while I'm being mysterious about this, let me show you the two models that came together here, and you might see why Roger is finding this hard. So ignore the love on this one. This is adaptation and stability, and autonomy and integration. So Stafford's Beer point was that as a whole system, we need to do separate things and we need to be stable. And we also need to have freedom to act at the lower levels of the system, but bring those bits together so that they're integrated as a whole. So that's the viable systems balance. And I will just find, maybe I haven't got it. Yes, I have. And then the Barry Oshry balance was differentiation and homogenization, individuation and integration. So you can see where I've got these dynamics from myself and how I've struggled with the wording, because none of these words are very accessible or very friendly, if you see what I mean. So to go back to the integrated model, sorry, Paul, I see you. I'll bring you in a second. Sorry, and I'm just dotting around my slides to find where that big picture is that I had up before. I do feel that the ability to go out and do things in the world links to both power and adaptation. So there's a kind of separation dynamic going on there. Might be a way of saying it. So in order to be effective, we have to separate, and I feel that love and non-separation fits with stability. Yeah, I'll come back to you in a minute, Roger. But Paul, did you want to come in on this?
I think I put it in the chat. There was an amazing example, I think, that illustrates this from a grammar school, so selective school. So this wouldn't work in all contexts. But there's an amazing example where one of the faculties in this school decided to co-design the curriculum with the students. So they described the intent and what they needed to achieve by the end of the year, but allowed the students to design how they got there. And they had a budget and some freedom to book school trips and get resources and speakers and whatever they needed. And it had an incredible effect. It empowered the students within reasonable boundaries. It empowered the students to take ownership of that. And every single student achieved an A star at GCSE as a result of it. It's in the chat now, the podcast describing it. I think it illustrates some of the ideas that you're talking about here.
Interesting, thank you. Yeah. That sounds great. It's balancing these things, I think, which is so critical. And I'll be really interested in this podcast. You get this very sterile debate, don't you, in education, which are just clicking on it, traditionalists and whatever the opposite of traditionalists.
Progressives and traditionalists.
Progressives. Yes. Yeah. And we're very good at throwing the baby out with the bathwater in the cause of our identity as traditionalists or progressives, aren't we? And therefore undermining our own approach by not actually doing all the things that we need to do. And that's why and then you become the opposite if you're not very, very careful. So progressives become fascists because they're absolutely strictly enforcing their progressivist rules. Agilists become dogmatic forcing of people to do things in a particular way because it's the right way of doing things, which is pretty much the opposite of what we set out to do.
Exactly. And if anything ever goes wrong, it's because you haven't had enough training or you're not following the method well enough.
That's right. True Agile has never been tried. So Roger, I don't think I've resolved your issue. I've explained to everybody else why it's a legitimate issue, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think to be honest, the thing that strikes me it was because I know much more about the viable system model than I do about Barry Oshry's stuff. I think maybe what's throwing me is that I think about the stability agility axis and the autonomy cohesion axis as being perpendicular, and it's not the way you set it out there. So you're doing something different from what I've got in my head, I think.
Say the axis that you say that again.
So I'm thinking about autonomy and cohesion. As perpendicular to stability and agility, and you've kind of got them. You're doing something the way that you've laid this out. So I think that might be what's throwing me.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
But I need to think about it more because I think there's some. I mean, there's an elegant. I want to say simplicity. I mean, simplicity in the not. It's not simplistic, but there's an elegance to what you've done here. It's really nice. It kind of resonates with.
Well, good. I mean, what I want to get across is trying to operationalize it. If you see what I mean. And giving people the tools to actually use it. While we're on this point, a friend of both of ours, Ivo Velichkov, has written a brilliant book. It's available as an ebook as well. Essential Balances, which is playing in the same territory. He's very much more developed. He talks about autonomy and cohesion, stability and diversity, and then he adds exploration and exploitation.
That threw me as well. But
okay, fine. Well, it's tricky, isn't it? Because we're trying to make neat systems of these things. When I shared this before, David mentioned Brenda Zimmerman's or the Liberating Structures STAR model, which I went and had a look at, and I thought, it's got a lot going on, which is related, but I couldn't, David, quite get over the same and different authentic work balance there, which I thought was really interesting. So there's more than one attempt to work on these kind of things. While I'm on related models, a model I keep coming back to from the Center for Creative Leadership has 6 things that you can do with separate individuals or teams. And the first one is what I call the grouping dynamics. So say if you're trying to get 6 teams in an organization to actually really stop being independent, stupid, separate teams and silo warfare and come together, you first of all reinforce them in their grouping, give them their safety and security. Yes, you are the digital team. Yes, you're the security team. That's okay. And get them to, then do the sharing. Yeah, this is why security is so important. This is why digital is so important. This is why the frontline service is so important. To root it in the reasons why we have the silos in the first place. Then start to do the blending. So you've done the grouping. Then from the grouping, that gives you the emotional security, in a sense, to do some of the blending. So that's the kind of leave your lanyard at the door stuff. Can we just suspend the boundaries for the next hour and actually talk about how we achieve this project, bringing in and blending all of our skills, right? Could we actually have some shared ownership and accountability of these boundary issues between our silos? Then possibly you can do the unification and remixing dynamics, where you're saying, actually, could we, have a community of practice around this thing that seems to cut across all of these teams, but then be careful that the community of practice in 2 years' time hasn't become the new silo. Could we change our boundaries? And through that, you want the personal empowerment to come through. So at the risk of going into too many things, that personal empowerment is really interesting, because it's one of the things where Barry Oshry, so I'll come back to, sorry, it's not the competing values framework. The competing values framework looks a bit similar, but it's about being in one box or the other. That's not what I'm interested in. That's why that slide was in there. Barry Oshry has a model called Encounters with the Other, which is a experiential workshop where you bring people into the workshop. You create separate cultures where people are given 20 minutes to read into and create some practices, some rituals, a history story of their own culture. And in just 20 minutes, they get into it really, really, really deeply. And you set them on a task, and then you bring the 2 cultures together. And then, all the kind of typical fireworks of cultural meetings in life, in organization, in countries, all kind of explode. And Barry talks about there's a natural condition of being dominant. Many of us in this room are dominant in our worlds in various ways. I'm a white, cis, middle class, well-off, well-educated man. So I kind of almost all of the time are in that dominant. This doesn't mean I am necessarily myself dominant, but it means the world is designed for me, right? To a significant degree. So everything is more comfortable for me, everything is more natural for me, and so on and so on. So others, the people who are excluded, the people who are othered in various ways in our culture, look a bit off, aren't quite comfortable, don't quite fit in, may be more self-conscious, may stumble over their tasks. And we get this dynamic where we're suspicious of each other, where there's a polarization that happens, right? So the predictable condition is you can either preserve and protect and go, oh, I don't want to be affected by those others over there. Or you can allow and adapt, which is like, oh, yes, very nice, you carry on. You do your special thing over there. We'll have a special day for the excluded groups or whatever. But neither of those changes the dynamic. Neither of those undermines that separation of the dominance and the others. And the consequences are that we end up in war and conflict and all the rest. And Barry's model, this is one of Barry's typical systems models, talks about the difference between dominant systems, which you flip between preserve and protect or allow and adapt, but nothing actually fundamentally changes. Where when you encounter the other, you're evaluating, fearing, defending, controlling, versus the possibility of robust systems, which is what we're trying to create here. So robust is another word that has multiple meanings and can get really confusing. But what he means is where the other is studied, welcomed, valued, and utilized in the whole, where there's a dynamic balance of those four dynamics going on. So we actually do an exercise where in the second half of that encounters with the other day, you form a company, you choose a culture, you form a company and you write your rituals, your practices, how you get pay and reward, how you make decisions, all of those things according to the culture you've chosen. And then surprise, surprise, one of the cultures does an aggressive takeover of all the other companies. And then all the companies have to come together, and then we practice not going into the dominant systems model, but going into the robust systems model, and how can we actually make a success of this merger by practicing those four dynamics, which are, in my mind, essentially the four dynamics that I'm talking about. So the idea is that this is geared for adaptivity, that this is actually about, being able to encounter the new, the different, and the truly other, and kind of respond to it in a productive way. In his organizational and his culture work, Barry talks about acting in service of the whole, in looking at the bigger system that you're a part of. And I think that's a connection. That's a strong kind of connection here, if that makes sense. I can't believe it. We're almost out of time. I haven't shared everything I wanted to share. So we have David and Claire. While you're speaking, David and Claire, I'm just going to jump to the slide which has the request for feedback from this session. So David, do you want to? Oh, sorry, Claire. Claire, go ahead first.
Thank you. I was just going to say that I probably come at this from a slightly different direction to a lot of people on this call, in that I'm not really a theorist. I trust that the theory is there, and I rely on people like Benjamin to prove or disprove the theories. I kind of work from a position of common sense, empathy, emotional intelligence, whatever you want to describe it as, and some tools. And for me, looking at what you've presented there, Benjamin, is a tool that I can use when I'm working on projects. So I trust the theory is correct. I'm happy for the rest of you guys to challenge that theory. But yeah, for me, that sort of takes on board some of the things that I already know. I know if you've got people in individual groups, you get silo thinking. How do you break out of that? Thank you very much. There's a lovely tool.
Great. Thank you so much. That's really affirming. I'm very grateful to hear that. And how I slickly get that across in a TED Talk style, 30 minutes is my next challenge. So on that note, if people can give any feedback, it's a quick retrospective survey on the link, or you can use the QR code on the screen. Did you want to chip in, David?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to ask the difficult question at the end, or you talked about the balancing, or the importance of balancing being at the heart of all of this, and it's so hard to I don't know, my experience is that even in a situation where we try and talk about balancing something, sort of, it's so easy for people to fall back into habitual ways of relating or ways of thinking, and you end up with this sort of polarized approaches. And I guess the challenge is also, like, how do you even at the most senior levels in an organization, perhaps it's even more challenging to have those kind of nuanced conversations, because there's a sort of pressure to have an appearance of certainty and confidence and so on. So I wondered if you got any thoughts on how do we make more space for conversations about balancing?
It's not easy, is it? I think on your first point, the question of how you build new habits is really important. And in an ideal world, I want to be working with senior leaders, and I want them to be in a learning mindset. So this very much fits in with me with the thing we do, which is called leader-led culture shaping. Or we get people to do their own inquiry, listen to the real stories, and what are they actually saying? How do they relate to certain triggers? the teams, with the organization. And it really doesn't work if people are not in a learning mindset. If they're in a blame or a defensive mindset, which often senior leaders really are. But I mean that's the point. But actually, sometimes having a concrete model does help to get people into that mindset. And the ideal thing with leaders is to get them into action learning, where action learning, or sometimes we call it action inquiry, where we will kind of run a session and we'll say, now go out and test this behavior 3 times, test doing this in this way. I had a particular chief executive who was the longest running chief executive in his sector, and was always bemoaning the fact that he kept hiring these really sparky, dynamic, bright kind of leaders, but his leadership team was always really boring and dead and wasn't dynamic. So that's sort of like, yeah, what could be the common factor in all of these configurations of the leadership teams that you've hired? And he was right, but the point was that he had this habit. He could not bear there to be tension in the discussion. So as soon as they got to a moment of frisson and kind of somebody was raising, there was some kind of dispute or something like that in the leadership team, he would jump in and give a sort of 15-minute long, boring sermon and just basically keep talking till everybody had lost the will to live, and there was no threat of there being any kind of conflict. As a result, the senior leadership team was in constant war because that was all repressed and all kind of hidden. So we said to him 3 times, what I want you to do is bite your tongue and allow the conflict to unfold. So that's an example of trying to build that habit. And amusingly, the way he did it at first, which was embarrassing to everyone, I think, was he said, "Oh, Benjamin's told me that I can't talk in these circumstances." But even with that kind of level of artificiality and cringe, it did kind of work. It did start to make a difference. So getting people to try something and hopefully build a habit by doing it more than once in a learning context where they've got some accountability, they're coming back to say, so when you tried that thing 3 times, how did it go? And if they come back into a room with their peers and say, "Oh, I didn't actually try it," then there's at least some kind of level of embarrassment, one would hope, something like that. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to. If you had to answer your own question, David, what's 1 or 2 things you would say?
Yeah, I haven't figured it out yet, I'm afraid. So I think your examples are really interesting. I think I have relatively few occasions to sort of have that many direct interactions with the sort of senior leadership. So
Sure.
So I think there are a lot of forces at play that, but I do think like we need sort of this making space for balance at all levels, at the ground level, but also at the more senior levels. So,
No, agreed. Agreed. Yeah. Sorry.
Maybe just to make it official, so people don't feel like a hostage, like I locked the door. Thank you so much, Ben. I think we can stay a little longer if you can. There is still 1 more question in the chat. If somebody else would like to chat, feel free. That room is for you. But just officially ending that and thanking you all for joining, for asking questions, participating actively. Thank you, Ben, for putting it out there and trying your talk. So
yeah, thanks.
If everybody,
hosting this and everyone else for joining in. That was great.
Awesome. So I wish you all a great continuation of the day or a great evening, depending where you are in the globe. Hope to see you again. And if you want to stay, you can stay. Otherwise, see you in the future. Cheers.
Thank you very much.
All right. There is still 1 question there. I'm not sure. Anthony, there is a question there that like, does this framework apply more or less to a particular organization?
No, I think it applies. It sounds like a big claim, but I think it's about both of the models I draw from the viable systems model and Barry Oshry's work are about like the fundamentals of organization as a thing rather than organizations as things. So I think they I think it's all organizations. There's probably some exceptions, but yeah, not in general in my experience.
Or even I'd say applying to organizing as a process, as a systemic process.
Yes.
If you think about organizations, they become a bit thing-like, but it's very dynamic, isn't it?
Yeah, that's.
This is a completely selfish thing, Benjamin. I'd really be keen to hear a couple of comments on the competing values framework, because you mentioned it earlier on, and it's come up in some work that I've been doing recently, and I thought, oh, that looks interesting. I wasn't aware of it before.
Well, I'm not an expert, and I think Jim, who you know, is an expert.
Yeah, indeed. That's how I know about it. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So I'm not sort of putting it down. And it is interesting that you've got differentiation, integration, flexibility, and stability as the four dynamics. So more than once when I've shared versions of this model, people have said, "Oh, is that like the competing values framework?" And obviously, to some, it is. But as I understand it, and I have looked into it and looked around it, it's basically sort of saying, what sort of an organization are you? So there's a dot, which is the weight of center of gravity.
Kind of diagnostic, isn't it? Yeah,
and it feels a bit 2x2 boxy to me. Which, even though mine looks like that, is not sort of the intention. And I have seen organizations move around the grid to some extent. And I see it much more as functional versus dysfunctional, to be honest. So I suspect that really strongly fitting into either of those in my model would mean that you're a pretty dysfunctional organization. So there's something interesting going on. Well, maybe most organizations are, but there's something interesting going on in the difference there, isn't there? So yeah, that would be my point. If you actually just fit into one of those boxes formally, then I would say you're dysfunctional, and they're saying you're a type. So that's probably the key difference.
And my take on this model was recognizing two things. First of all, thinking about organizations that I've worked with or been part of, and feeling, I can identify where they sit really quite strongly, but also recognizing my own personal preference.
Yes.
To away from the bottom of this and towards the top of it, with some kind of ambivalence, wanting to flip between clan and adhocracy, sort of taking forays into the world of adhocracy, and then wanting to find my way back to the clan. I was really kind of, I was kind of, just getting a personal.
No, that makes sense. And so there's definitely something to this model, isn't there? Even though there seems to be some real tension with what I'm offering here.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, David.
Good.
Well, yeah. Thanks, Roger. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it. What was I going to just while I'm talking of those flavors between the things, Arthur, if you don't mind being with us for one more minute. You might both be interested in this. There's a great podcast called the Many Minds podcast, which just in its title I think is really nice. But this one is about some people who've created a new typology of phase transitions in cognition. So different ways of organizing cognitive